Okay, so let's get started. So this is the first of our People and Culture series episodes, kicking off with what your people want and need from you, from burnout to balance. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. My name is Mark Hamill, and I'm the CEO of Architect Global. Just to give you a bit of insight about who Architect Global are and what we do, we're a hybrid consultancy company helping organizations improve in areas that matter most to sustainable success. One of the things that will be in focus today is our Architect Global Talent Management Solutions, which help companies get the best out of their most important resource, which is its people. And this is looking at not just cutting edge tools, but also with leading experts who are here joining us today. And they'll run through some exciting content about burnout to balance. And just a bit of housekeeping from our side. Please keep yourself on mute until we open up for the Q&A. After my introduction, I'll pass over to Melissa and Diane, who will also share some content. And then once that's been completed, we'll open the floor to discussion and we can go through some Q&A. And please have fun as well. So I'll just pass you over to Melissa and Diane. So Melissa, if you want to give yourself a brief introduction, over to you.
Sure. Howdy, y'all. My name is Melissa Ortiz, and my area of expertise is really around how do we get the right talent into the right seats that honor those talents, onboard, engage them, and retain them ultimately in a way that really maintains their overall well-being, because what we know is that when people are engaged in their roles, they have more energy for work and the rest of their lives, and they're significantly more resistant to the burnout discussion that we're having today. So I'm thrilled to be here with you.
And I am thrilled to be here as well, Diane Magers with Experience Catalyst. Melissa and I have quite a history going back. We worked together at Cisco Foods with how not only thinking about the talent in our employees, but also how are we going to help the organization really adopt and engage them in a different way. So it's been quite a while. So Melissa and I have done several things together, and we're going to have an approach really from both that employee piece, but also how managers and the organizations can really start paying attention to some of the things that are happening, especially around burnout. So I'm just going to start us off, and we'll, as Mark said, we'll do a little bit of presentation, but we really want to get to the discussion point. So we're going to drop in a few of those idea starters for you so that you can kind of think about where we are and how we're approaching this topic. So our whole conversation really started with thinking about the great resignation or the great realignment, as we're going to call it. One of the things that we shared in our last event that we had was really that burnout is one of the highest reasons for people really switching or looking for a different job. So they might not have switched yet, but there's a high percentage that are looking, even if they're still in their current role. So how do we go from this burnout to balance? What are organizations doing differently? And how can we think about it and put some actions in place that are going to allow us to address this topic of burnout? So as you know, we have been thinking a lot about this. We hear the great resignation, but the piece that we want to bring to the table is it's really about realignment. So resignation is an outcome of something that's happened, but what we want to do is begin to understand why we as human beings are realigning our lives and realigning our careers and the roles that we play. I think this trend was really happening before the pandemic, but I think it really brought it home. So we've been talking about this for a long time. It's just accelerated so much more in this space. And we're going to talk about some reasons why.
I think Diane, there's been so much energy placed around what is it and how big is it and how bad is it, without the same amount of energy being placed on that understanding why and what we can really do to address it holistically versus just really trying to focus on the metrics and the pain points around it.
Absolutely. But let's talk about some of those numbers, because I think these are data points that are important as we think through the rest of it. So Melissa, let's walk through a few of these and kind of share a little bit about what we should be thinking about when it comes to the impact.
Yeah. So as we get into the why, it is helpful to discuss the what. So we're looking at, 40% of employees across the world are looking at quitting. That's just slightly lower in the UK. So if you're there, good on you, right? The problem is very slightly less for you. Let's see, what do we have next, Diane? 4.3 million people just in the US have already quit their jobs, which amid a pandemic was a pretty scary thing to do. And as we, early stages, there was a lot of fear and people stayed, but as they got more and more disenfranchised with their organizations, it made it easier to quit. And as that market has come back, we're, at a place where our labor market is tighter even than it was before the pandemic, which is hard to believe, but it's where we are.
Yeah. We talk about quitting, but it's interesting to look at the statistics behind the transition of where they went, right? That people stopped and started their own gig. They moved to another role. It wasn't just the quitting and we have this big void. It's really now, are they getting to the right place, to your point of, is this really leveraging my talent and my needs and wants from my life, rather than it being, I'm going to be in a role that doesn't fulfill me.
Right. And even really back to your point, though, people who did leave the labor market, and that's part of the reason we have such a shortage of great workers, is people said, I'm just tired of all of this, I'm out, versus being, and I think what we'll see is eventually they'll come back into the workforce because they'll find something that's a better fit. But that's part of our job as employers, is to help recruit them in a way that matches those talents to roles. So we're really seeing this labor shortage all over Asia, Europe, US. And even as, vaccination rates are coming up and people are gaining confidence that it's safe, many are still resistant to coming back, especially coming back into the office. They found different ways to make their lives work without sometimes an hour and a half commute each way every day. They start to do the math when they're not making that commute and realize how much of life they were missing out on and how productive they can be without office gossip and, long lunches. They can just get their work done. One study of 6,000 employees saw that so many are really actively looking for a change. And there's so many factors, right? I don't know that we can pinpoint exactly all the elements, but this burnout element is such a strong factor. Diane, let's look at a couple of the numbers that came within that study. Mm-hmm. So almost 70% of our employees are confident about moving to a new role in the next few months. 70%. If that's not a tidal wave coming our way or a tsunami, hopefully we can retain some of those and find new opportunities for them within. But what we see in the data typically is people are more likely to look outside the organization for a new role than to actually have the hard conversation with leadership about, I feel like I'm miscast, or I'm really itching for something new. Can we look for something for me here, versus finding somewhere else that they have to really start from scratch. And in the next 3 to 6 months, we're looking at a quarter of people really looking to change jobs. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, and the important part of this too is that as we looked at the documents and the statistics, we found that a lot of it is this upper talent, like your very talented people that you want to get to capture. They have a free reign to go find an organization who is going to satisfy their needs. And there's a couple of research papers that we found that we'll share the links to, that are talking about how they are moving to an organization where their talent is more leveraged. It's a better fit for them. So that's another key indicator of not just the movement, but it's those people you rely on heavily as the leaders in your organization.
Because the world is their oyster, right? And they know it.
That's right.
Yeah, this is really the unsticking of the fear. Even people who are much more risk averse are starting to look.
And I think we're going to really see.
Go ahead, Dan.
I think we're going to talk about this YOLO effect, right? So this is one of the things that we find is coming into place is people just are valuing their life so much differently than they did before, and they want more out of life. You only live once is what this stands for. And so that's this whole pressure point of, we were seeing a lot of this transition before, but with burnout, that's why they're kind of making that. I want to be in a place where I'm being fulfilled, and all those other psychological things we know are happening. It's that pressure there that's really making this move happen. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit.
Great.
Okay, so the last time we were together, we talked about some of these changes and what was happening and what were the things that were really driving it. And the reason that we chose this as one of the first opportunities for us to talk was burnout is at the top of the list. Yes, we're going through lots of organizational changes. The flexibility piece has been coming for several years. Discrimination was another one. So you can see here that all of these things contributing to it, but for burnout, there's a lot of different things that are happening. And so we want to spend a little bit of time today walking through the types of burnout, what that means for organizations, and think a little bit about how can we address burnout from all those different perspectives.
You know, Diane, we've known about the correlations between stress and engagement for more than a decade. There's tons of research. Gallup has done some great work around really understanding that correlation between cortisol levels and engagement, and really then between engagement and alignment of natural talents to the job demands. We've also known burnout by the numbers, right? We're seeing that it's costing the US economy alone between $300 and $500 billion a year in losses due to absenteeism, turnover, reduced productivity, and increased healthcare costs. And what I see is so many organizations try to address the symptoms rather than the root cause. And we've known the root cause, right? Get the right people in the right jobs, unleash them, manage them by objectives, and really help them thrive. But they try to throw wellness programs and a yoga class in and some meditation moments. And that's not addressing the real root cause of why people feel so drained at work. So really what we are hoping to discuss today is a little bit of what is that root cause and what can we do about it?
So Jack Sparrow, I think our inspiration here was kind of changing our vision and our perception and attitude about the problem. It isn't about those things that we say, as I say, it's beyond the bagels, right? Things that we think about, the meditation moments and bagels on Friday, they're all great perks, but are we really addressing that human need? And so we want to talk a little bit more about that and how we can start to address it. So
they're almost great perks, Diane, they're almost great perks when you're not burnout. When you are burnout, when you are stressed, it's almost an insult. It's like you think you can fix what's going on here with a bagel. You have totally lost your grip. And so it's a credibility factor, right? When we're working on the wrong, more superficial elements.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about defining the burnout. So we went to the World Health Organization, who defines burnout as a syndrome resulting from kind of this chronic workplace stress that Melissa was talking about. It's exhaustion or lack of energy. It's negative or cynical feelings. You think about what you might be going through in your own work. You think about that those employees become a little cynical about what they're doing. They're also seeing a reduced effectiveness in a role, which, to nod to Melissa, this talent fit is, am I really being challenged? Am I really in the right position that leverages my talent and helps me really identify the types of problems I love to solve? So although WHO offers this formal definition, it's still a little cloudy in some areas. Melissa, how would you define it?
So as I was kind of working through this content, what came to me was it's a little bit like pornography, right? We know it when we see it. Or in this case, with burnout, we know it when we feel it. It's like it's kind of ambiguous and it kind of comes slowly and then all at once. And it's, you know it when you're in it. I mean, certainly some of these pictures depict some of the causes and some of that feeling. God, I love this guy on the right, the bottom right, who's just like everything is being shoved in his face and you just get so overwhelmed. I think about it kind of like your brain getting saturated like a sponge, and there's just nothing else that can come in unless something else gets pushed out.
And I think if we break that down a little bit there, that one is a great example of what we would call the deadline burnout. Like there's always this sense of urgency. But before we kind of go into those kind of brands of burnout, we also wanted to pull in a few of the things that we feel that are really these emotional factors behind it, right? This sense of failure and self-doubt about what people are doing, that they're feeling helpless and trapped and defeated. This detachment and kind of this aloneness, especially when all of us are working remote and we don't have a chance to re-engage and reconnect with folks and bounce ideas off of each other, which is where a lot of, particularly the younger generations, really need that ability to share ideas and be innovative. that creates this loss of motivation and that cynical negative outlook that we talked about. So this whole emotional piece behind it is really the sense of the result of burnout. And when you think about people not being all that self-aware, they know what they're feeling, but even they have a hard time identifying and threading it back to, it's just the pressure from my job. But there can be a lot of different ways that the pressure they're feeling, the resulting in these feelings, is coming from different parts of the organization and different ways that it's coming to them.
You know,
So
Diane, to me, looking at the data around it, it's so clear to me why it's our top performers that are feeling that, right? They're the ones who, if you think about their social life, often they had great friends at work. They really derived a lot of joy from the work and the companionship at work. And when we took the companionship away and it became about just the work, it becomes a lot less fulfilling pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does. It does. And that really helps us with trying to really understand if we think about the types of burnout. And this is our beginning to kind of decomposition of what's happening in burnout. We think about deadline burnout. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory. Too many deadlines coming at once, and we're operating beyond our capacity for extended periods of time. We're asked to do more with less, and we simply can't anymore. So then that's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we can't meet deadlines, when we're used to doing that and we're used to performing, and we're performing well, but we're not getting as much done given what's been given to us. We think about this kind of personal burnout as well. And this is the one I think most often about. It's the plain old, I have too many balls in the air and I just can't. Especially in people being shifted to new business models, new processes, and expanded responsibilities to cover for those vacant seats in the org chart. So we're seeing this very personal feeling of, I was able to perform in my work, but with so many other things going on, I feel personally like I'm not able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. We have this culture burnout. And this is when we think about a group of individuals who all arrive in burnout land together. Sometimes because of the drama, they've disengaged and created themselves kind of a space where rather than struggling with the culture, they're ignoring it. They're not becoming a part of it. So while we're trying to really push this culture, get everybody together, we're not really caring for the individual there and bringing them back to that culture. So there's this, hey, if we get a group together and we have all these values, which Melissa's going to talk about in a minute, how do we really create that and make it different than it has been today? Because the old ways of culture, the ways of working have changed. And have we changed the expectations for individuals? And then this last one is about skill burnout. And this is really, when we think about recruiting and hiring and onboarding and all our development, it's really burned out. It's about burnout and due to that kind of misalignment. When we think about what we really want that person to be able to do and the skills they bring to the table. So Melissa, this is your area of expertise, that talent to fit. Can you share a little bit more about how that burnout happens?
Yeah, it's like when I'm asked to do something I know I'm not incredibly talented at, but I've got a good attitude and I'm going to give it my all. And at some point I just hit this wall because I have nothing more to give. I may be getting incrementally better, but I'm not seeing big improvement. And it just taxes your brain and your soul in a way that is hard to address unless you switch roles. And often people just switch organizations because they feel like they're just not, they know in their hearts they're not a fit for that role, and try as they might, it's like trying to walk through the sand with a weighted bag behind you. You're just struggling. And I don't know that we all consciously know why, but you feel it. I'm not meant for greatness in this role for sure.
And we wanted to call out here too, when we think about these types of burnout or the brands of burnout, one of the things that we've been researching a lot on is leadership. And so oftentimes we think of this as a leadership, needs to do something. And what we find is that even CEOs now are talking about the fact that they're burnt out, that there's so much coming at them. They've had so much to adjust to, and the burnout of their people is one more thing in addition to them also feeling it. So when we talk about this, it's not like we're looking for somebody to actually say they have to solve it. It really has to be everyone thinking about their own, which is why we're seeing people move and switch locations and companies, because they're looking for the place where they feel like they can really be a part of that and get their needs taken care of and get the right talent to roll. So the other thing that we wanted to just talk quickly about is let's talk a little bit about, well, how often is this happening and what's the impact of it? Melissa?
It's fascinating how much the impact of your manager's level of burnout has on you personally. The data is just staggering. If you have a burnout manager, you're significantly more likely to burn out. Whereas if your manager's like, it's okay, we got this, I got this, take your time, do what you need to do, you're less likely. So Gallup's recent study found that more than a quarter of people say they are burned out very often or always. That's like a knife to my heart. Very often or always. That is a chronic level. And the same study really found that people who experience burnout, right, they have a bunch of data that goes along with that. So what's it costing us? They're taking a significant amount more sick days. They're going to the ER. Nobody wants to be in the emergency room. This group is significantly more likely to end up in the ER. And they're also exponentially more likely to be job hunting because they just can't do it anymore. And, you know, there's the old adage that people join companies and leave managers. And that's a lot of what's going on here, is that manager is not acting. We think about managers and leaders acting, they're the window through which employees see the organization. And this is that place where they're projecting what's going on in the organization. Are things getting better or getting worse? When you think about that cultural burnout Diane was talking about, we arrive there together often because that's what you're hearing in this cacophony of your Zoom meetings. I'm so tired, I can't get it all done. And then it kind of rubs off on you the same way that boosts in engagement can be contagious as well.
Yeah, great call out. So we wanted to talk just briefly about this YOLO effect. So Melissa, do you want to share a little bit about how this, by the way, we've got a paper a link that we'll send to you at the end of this, because there was so much data around this and it was extremely interesting, this kind of almost global cultural shift for this YOLO. While we saw it really being the millennials and the start of that, now we're seeing it really ramp up. So Melissa, you want to share a little bit about that?
I mean, I think you didn't have to be home with your kids teaching kindergarten and preschool very long to realize that life was just too short to be doing something you weren't meant to do. I was not meant to be a teacher. And it really helps us think about, there were these moments where we were isolated and forced to really do some thinking. And I think it isn't just the millennials. I'm seeing it across industries, across demographics. People are going, life's too short. It's just too short. I don't want to do this anymore. And, you know, I was listening to, I don't know if anybody's read the book Essentialism, and they were talking about a nurse who had cataloged, she was a hospice nurse that helped people through their last days. And she was talking about how the regrets people had were primarily about, I should have lived the life that was true to me rather than trying to please people. And I think that's what this is. This is finding a life that's true to me. And maybe I'm going to do it stumbling because I don't have great data or great analysis on who I am, but I know what I'm doing isn't right. And I've got to go find that. I've got to go in pursuit of that. And I think the job market's good enough that it's enabling that. Pay rates are pretty strong right now and getting better. So there's this freedom to move and people are taking advantage of it.
That's great. So we'll send you a little more information on this because there's some good impacts too of how you help people realize that where they are or help them shift. You know, it might be just the wrong role in the organization. So I think that will really help you. There's a lot of great data behind this particular effect. We also wanted to talk a little bit about Mythbusters. So we hear a lot in talking to clients about, you know, they keep talking about this great resignation and that just feels depressing just to say that word, right? This great resignation. While we know on the other end, really what's causing it and why people are resigning and what that really means to organizations and how they should think about it. So this very first one, as you saw at the beginning of our presentation, was about this realignment. YOLO is a great example of that. Realigning to where I find value, I feel value, my talents are utilized, I can live that life that I was meant to live.
I think about this as something we should really, it's a little bit of like, it takes the wind out of you, but this is something we should be celebrating because by the data, people who are aligned with their roles naturally produce exponentially higher results. They're more likely to stay. They're more likely to get other people engaged and on board. And so if we can steel ourselves against the data and say, gosh, I see what's coming and what's happening, to say, you mean I'm more likely to get the right people in the right seats and keep them? Let's let's do this. Like, yeah, change readiness. We can do this in a way that's really meaningful and that creates lasting impact for our teams and for our organizations.
Yeah, the second one, this myth was, managing people more closely than ever, to really be hypersensitive and really making sure they understand what we're doing because of all the business model shifts and because people are expected to do more. We have to manage them closer. When in fact, when we start to think about more accountability to clearly defined outcomes, this gives people the freedom to create the way that they want to. They understand what they're supposed to do. They're part of co-creating what that's going to look like. So we're finding that while people are thinking that the managing them is different, when in fact, it's really the opposite. It's more about engaging them and letting them be who they are and contributing to the organization and the outcomes that they want to produce, which align to the brand outcome.
And I think that's so much about just defining, what do I need you to produce in this role, and allowing them to find their own path, because their path often might be more elegant than ours, and it'll certainly be more aligned with their unique approach, that then they get there faster with better results, rather than trying to take my approach, which is going to feel like the wrong size coat.
And what I love about this is that last time we talked a little bit about this entrepreneurship, where people want to do things on their own. And we find a lot of people who left the workforce and started their own companies because they want that freedom to create in the way that is comfortable for them. And we're finding that organizations that are allowing that to happen inside the organization, that entrepreneurship, are really finding that that's a great benefit. To Melissa's point about how you let them travel that path on their own. And we're finding more creativity and more innovation as a result of it. So that's very encouraging when we think about what people are trying to do, is really say, we're going to manage them better and be all over them to make sure they're doing what we want them to do.
And I think there's, especially when the psychographic that non-millennials have around millennials is like, they just want to work less. What we really see in the data is that they're more determined than any other generation to find work that matters to them, that they feel like they can get excited about. So we think about that difference between, work-life balance. This really leads into the next one, work-life balance versus work-life integration. They want their work to be their life in a way that past generation, they saw their parents dreading going to work. I have to leave you because I have to go to work, versus I love my job. This is so interesting. Let me tell you what I'm working on. And bringing them along. And so that integration versus a balance that you could have both be successful. It's like, well, if both are intertwined, it's a whole lot easier for them to be successful, because the bar is much shorter between work and life because it's one.
Yeah, that fits right into the last one of work life, this balance between the two. And what we're finding, and many of you have probably thought about this, that it's much more integrated now, because most of us are at home. And so we have to really integrate it into what we do every day. And that is a trend that we don't see going away. A lot of the data now is talking about not just work from home, but how it becomes a part of not clear boundaries, but understanding, if I can achieve these things at work and I can achieve these things in my personal life, that all those things are one. But I need to be very understanding of how I'm going to approach that and how I'm going to achieve those goals.
Even on that point, even just think about how much more comfortable we are with people's kids coming into the screen, like homework question, just a sec, or they just want to come say hi to your work friends. And it's this way to get to know each other differently, or pets or whatever. And that's way more comfortable than it ever was pre-pandemic. It was like, shh, go away now. Does that still happen? Absolutely. This is not the time. This is not the meeting, but it is much more integrated into the way that we work.
Love it. Love it. So just a few Mythbusters for you. And we challenge you to think about those statements that you or your organization are making about what you're doing around employees, and really question, am I just giving it a label, or am I really thinking about where I'm headed and what I want my organization to do differently? So we're going to talk about a few things that are just we're going to kind of flip now to, great, we understand what burnout is now. We've talked about some of the pieces, but this is where we're going to kind of intro let's have a discussion. So we want to just present a few things that we found that are these bigger trends of what organizations are trying to do. Melissa, you want to start us out with this one?
Yeah, I think about the difference between sympathy and empathy, like, oh, poor you, versus, yeah, I get that, right? It's a very different mean, sympathy often can be even condescending because like, I don't have that going on in my life, but I could see how that'd be hard for you. But really practicing that kind attention and assume, and in very fair ways, that everybody's struggling with something right now. You just don't know what it is. So if you have that relationship with them, trying to understand what's really going on, like, how are you? How is your heart? How are you doing? Versus, hey, how's it going? And just acknowledging that everybody's got stuff under the surface really makes for some great empathy that we don't need to judge. There's no time and energy for that.
I think it's that you called it kind attention, that it was not the same old, how are you doing? And everybody's like, I'm fine, I'm busy. But really, what is going on behind those curtains?
And I think some of that is modeling, right? Being willing to be vulnerable, especially if you're a leader, about the things that are going on in your life, makes it okay that we don't all have to have perfect little lives. That, yeah, what are you struggling with this week? It's like the cadence of, oh, here's the challenge I'm on this week, and making it just part of our routine to acknowledge. And let me know if you need anything. How can I help?
Yeah, exactly right. And also, we've been seeing a lot about this kind of positive gossip. So one of the things that we're just talking about, how we really open up and talking about not just asking about where people are and having that empathy, but also how are we creating this? I really found a great way to work around the stress that I was having, or I'm thinking about how we're really helping to move the organization forward. Thinking about how you're really sharing that, because negativity breeds negativity. And while we need to be understanding and create that empathy and talk through those things, it's also the opposite of beginning to create what they call this positive gossip. These narratives about what's really happening, how people are transitioning. So we're seeing a bit more now in the research on, we went through kind of this down trough of, now that people are kind of coming out of it, we're seeing more about, what has this done for us as individuals? What have we learned? I don't know about all of you, but for that vulnerability piece, like, I've learned a lot more about myself in the last 2 years than I probably did in the first 40 years of my career. So it's one of those things I think we want to take stock of and really think about the positive things, like letting go of some things that weren't as important, or shifting really the interest in what I really love to do versus all the things I thought that I really needed to do. And so that's another way to think about that self-efficiency and high productivity.
I think it also helps us think about reminding each other that there are good things happening and bringing those to the surface, rather than letting everyone get caught in their ailments and their frustrations. And it, like, what's something good that's going on that we can take a moment to rescue or help resonate?
Melissa, you were sharing a story about this discussion you had on values. You want to share that with the
Yeah, I'd love to. I actually just was part of an entrepreneurial operating system. EOS is kind of a small to mid-sized business operating platform that is absolutely catching fire right now. And I was part of a panel yesterday, and we were talking about values and how critical values and cultural definitions are to job seekers, to people in role, really in the labor market, and how small and medium-sized businesses have such a leg up on this space, because when they define it and they can hold themselves accountable for it in a way that bigger organizations never can. Big organizations have the ability to put out tons of marketing materials around their values, but it's so much harder to keep all the leadership in line in a way that they show and display those values daily. Or in a small organization, if we craft our values correctly, they're just what we live and breathe, because there are fewer of us. And so it's just getting those definitions to the point where not only do we share them, we repeat them ad nauseum, but we also hire, fire, promote, and reward people based on those values. That really helps them feel tangible within the organizations. I've got clients that are doing recruiting videos just based on it. Here's who we are. If you're interested in that, let us know. Let's see if we can find you a role that's not even role specific recruiting. So.
And I have one organization who's they're not redoing their values. They've had values for a while, but they've certainly expanded them to include things that are more global, like sustainability. And what they're finding though is that people want to understand how that gets demonstrated, right? We have those values, but where do I see that happening in the organization? And so defining those measurable, trackable, traceable behaviors that the organization is doing that really demonstrates those values. because people will say, yes, I want to be more collaborative. That's one of the values with our customers. But what's going to tell you that's actually happening? So we're seeing people translate those, what used to be the posters on the wall, into truly what are the behaviors from leadership, from the people on the front line and everybody in between. How are we really understanding that we're living those values rather than just being, hey, these are the things we live to, and people really don't understand how they thread to it or what they're supposed to do differently. So we're seeing many more organizations being specific about that so that there's a core, this is real, this is how we're doing it, and we're tracking how we're demonstrating those values.
Yeah.
So that's an important.
Diane, I don't know if you've seen it or if anybody on the webinar has seen it, but there's a Weird Al video and song called Mission Statement. Have you seen it?
No.
I absolutely highly recommend it. It's one of the hand sketch videos, and it's got every bit of the corporate jargon in it. And it is just brilliantly done. I think it's some of his best work. And he just captures like corporate businesses beautifully. So I recommend you spend 3 minutes of your day lightheartedly enjoying Weird Al.
Yeah, see if Richard, if you can help us. So Richard's helping to escort us today on the technology. If you can search maybe and find that and put it in chat.
Weird Al mission statement. It is comic relief for the day.
Little moment of levity. That's been one of my my mantras through this pandemic. So let's talk just a little bit then. If we're going to open it up to kind of a Q&A, we're going to talk a little bit about how we go do this, and we're going to talk through just a few questions here. So we'll take just a few minutes to kind of explore each one. Open it up if we can give everybody time on the mic, and let's have some discussion around, what are you all seeing? What are you all seeing organizations do differently? What are they struggling with? What resonated with you here today, so that we can start talking about what are we going to go do? Where can we help our organizations do differently? Anybody want to weigh in?
Sometimes it's easier to talk about what we're not doing well, right? What are you seeing out there that's not going well, that's annoying, irritating, makes you roll your eyes?
I mean, for me, I can start just to kick things off. When I had burnout, probably I think 2020, it definitely was a shorter period of time. I felt it wasn't always. So when I saw that figure and I thought people are feeling burnout all the time, that percentage of people, I was shocked, I have to say. But I think for me, it was just a case of stepping back for a couple of weeks, and then also the thing that you mentioned, Melissa, is sort of your brain only can support so much information or whatever it is. Like, it's cognitive reserves almost. Once they're spent, they're spent. So you have to just go away, basically. That's how I felt when I suffered from it. And then you know what to look out for. The pornography example, like, you know what you said, to look out for it next time. It's very, very obvious, the signs. And that's just my personal experience that happened to me.
Yeah. I felt that a lot of people, I included, felt angry. Like all this that we had worked for had kind of been taken away for a while. And there was nothing you could do about it. So it was kind of this railing and frustration with nothing, no one, you couldn't do anything about it. And for those of us that were high producers, we usually feel like we can figure things out. And I think there was a lot of spinning around that frustration.
Yep.
Great. We've got a question in the chat. It says, we're trying to boost morale and have some company events, but the costs have risen and the turnout isn't great. Any ideas on cost-effective ways to bring staff together? Sounds like getting some of the staff to really, have that sharing, have that empathy, some of the things we talked about earlier. Anybody have any ideas they want to share with the group?
I mean, it depends on what they'd be looking for and how many people, but I think even just having smaller events and the localities is probably a good way of doing it. So just without knowing the nature of your business, but having something, you might be all over the country or several countries, just do something smaller and more informal rather than having something that's large scale and everyone in one place might be a way of doing it. And then you could beam in any of the sort of official company content to those locations. I think that would probably be a much cheaper way of doing it. That's just a suggestion off the bat, but not sure if you've tried that already.
That's
I was
great.
talking to a venture capital group yesterday, and they were saying that they've never really done swag for their employees. And so they sent out a bunch of pullovers, and organically people started posting pictures of themselves in the pullover with their dogs. Why the dogs? I don't know. It just happened. And then it kind of caught wildfire. So sometimes we can't plan for it. We just have to try and see what comes of it. And sometimes getting input from team members about, what would be meaningful can give us some clues rather than having to be always the only problem solver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's giving people too a sense of control. When I was a psychologist, one of the things that we found with people who were burned out, stressed out, depressed, anxious, is just by giving them some sense of control over something really helped them. And so we're doing with one organization, we're doing some sessions with the employees, and there's outcomes attached to it that they feel like they've got this co-creation, they've got a sense of purpose, they're seeing kind of that box getting checked, they feel like they're contributing. So that sense of control of making some decisions and coming together and really trying to solve a problem with all the different talents gives them that feeling of accomplishment. And that tends to move people forward, because sometimes I always think it's just a checklist of things and I really don't feel like I'm accomplishing something. So acknowledging that and bringing them together to recognize that and create together is a great way to do that.
Yeah. And I think we really underestimate, when we think about trying to connect with people, we underestimate the basics of engagement, right? Making sure everybody knows what's expected. Because if you end up spinning your wheels for a long time on something that wasn't going to hit the mark in the first place, that's demoralizing to the team member and to the organization, right? So when we get expectations, we make sure everybody has the resources they need. We feel like we're far enough into the pandemic that we should all have our work from home resources, but just that question, like, hey, I just want to check back. Do you have what you need? Do you have the right amount of monitors for you to be as effective as you need to be? Those little things show that level of care about, I just want to make sure you're supported to do what I'm asking you to do, and continually checking in on that talent piece. Are you the right person to be doing this job? Or should we be continually looking for a different seat on this bus for you? Are some of the most respectful and helpful questions, I think, that we underestimate a lot.
Yeah, love that.
Finding that leaders, I see one in the chat from Tracy. I think I'm finding that leaders burnout seems to be more remarkable, even being at home, as we're trying to do more with less and trying to ensure that we don't transfer that to our staff can be challenging.
Yeah, hi, it's Tracy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I think I changed organizations in 2020. And, I think some of the reasons that you've talked about here today, about just that absolute burnout, feeling like you're just overwhelmed, and even at home, because, you start early and you stay late, right? Because you're here, right? And, for those people that maybe don't have kids at home anymore, you have that flexibility, and you find that all you're doing is working. So you don't necessarily have that break. And I think that the expectation now from leaders is that you are online all the time, that you are available all the time, that you're managing not only from your workspace, but you're managing from your phone, and you're available on a consistent basis. And, we've seen people leave, and, even leaders are finding that they're taxed. And so for me, I think that that's the biggest challenge that I've had. Because there just doesn't seem to be enough hours in the day. You've now lost that commute time. So now you're trying to dedicate that to your work time. And it seems to cause more burnout than maybe when I was in the office.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether anybody else is experiencing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Michelle. I just thought, so personally, several years ago, I got hit by burnout right between the eyes, just really hard. And I did a complete pivot. And so I think it's kind of interesting because it took me on a whole journey. And so I still work in corporate. I love my job. but I also do a lot of other things. And I think what's interesting is, as individuals, I think we don't know how to look inside ourselves to figure out what do we actually want. So we kind of are passive in our own life. We're waiting for the company to solve it for us. And I almost think there's this opportunity for companies to create space to kind of bring this awareness to their employees that says, you know what, maybe I need to pause a minute, figure out what it is I want, what brings me joy. Because what I found is, in some cases, what I thought I was being really frustrated from a job perspective really had nothing to do with my job. It was to the point that was just made a minute ago. I'm putting too much pressure on myself as a mom and taking care of the kids, as a wife, all those things. And I think it's just a lot more of self-reflection, and then building out the plan to go create where you want to go. And it's great when you have an employer that can walk alongside and help support and enable that.
It's a great message. Thanks for sharing that, Melissa. Michelle, that's a hard way to really think about when it does hit you between the eyeballs, and having that skill set and really stopping and thinking about it in a different way. And I think that comes with, we got to lean on other people. I just saw the quote from Bob Asman here that somebody said, it's that he shared with who said it? Lisa, a couple years ago. He said, know me, help me, value me. And I think for you, Michelle, that's exactly what it was. You needed somebody to really understand what you were going through to help you get there and help you see your own value, which is great. I love that. Thanks for sharing.
There was a question about PTO, and people are taking less paid time off, and how are we encouraging people to disconnect? And the only thing I've seen that's actually been effective, there's 100 policies and norms, but the only thing that I see is leadership modeling that. Like people who say, I'm available Saturday mornings, but Saturday at noon till Monday morning, I'm out. I'm with family. I'm doing physical stuff. I'm doing house projects. But I can have a little flex on Saturday morning, but after that, I'll be there Monday. I'll be back in. And so we have to model it. Otherwise, it will never happen.
And I have a nonprofit in the leadership team. There's about 25 of them modeling that behavior. And what that means for them is they don't send emails. They don't send meeting requests. They don't respond to anything from that same time frame, because they want to model that behavior. They're not going to do it, so they don't expect anybody else to either. So we can tell them that all day long, but that skepticism as an employee, like, yeah, you say that, but I still have to get the work done.
Go ahead and tee up your emails to delay delivery till Monday morning. That's fine. It's like, I love to work Sunday nights. That's some of my most productive time. And I tee up all my emails to go out Monday morning, but I have until I put the kids down on Sunday to just stop and not. And it really seems to help.
So we are coming up at the end of our time together, and I think it's been a great conversation. Thank all of you for sharing some of the things that you're seeing. We've got some conversations in the chat, which you can take a look at too. We also wanted to give you a technique. As you know, one of the things that we love to do here is to give you, great, you told me about it, but what do I go do about it? And so I wanted to share with you this technique that I've used for insights for quite some time. And it's similar to the 5 whys, but it gets you to really break these big rocks of things like burnout into different, what is comprised, that does it comprise, what can I do about it, and what action can I take? So I'm just going to share the technique with you and tell you the story about how we used it. And I think if you translate it into having the topic of burnout, you'll start to see that there are lots of things, as we've talked about, that can be driving that. So the way the technique works, it's a little like mind mapping. So I've got just a brief kind of breakdown here, but I've done this technique where it's covered an entire wall. So it really gives you an opportunity to drill in and break down these big rocks into those smaller pebbles and even grains of sand. So the example that I use is one from a specialty insurance company who they insure classic and antique cars. And working with them, one of the things that we discovered was there was some of these really big things that had been chewing on them for a long time as an organization. And one of those was renewing their contract. The renewing the contract was confusing. That's what they were hearing from their customers. So they took that issue and they said, okay, what if we were just to break that down into why is it happening? What are all the things that could be causing that? And you see here, like, don't have instructions. They haven't been told how to renew. There's multiple people involved. The instructions are too complex. So they broke it down into all these things that could be causing it. And then for each one of those, as you see on the second little blue box down, they broke that into how could we fix this issue? So each and every one of those, why is it happening? They began to break down into how we can fix it. And then for each one of those, they began to create actions. And so by the end of this, they had not only here's the core opportunity like burnout, but they had then begun to really investigate it and break it down into those tactical things they could go do, and eventually started to prioritize those action items. So our challenge for you today is using this technique to just think about burnout and what's happening with employees and your leaders, that we can really think about ways that this is what's causing it, how we could fix it, and then what actions could we take. And so you're going to end up with a great menu of things that you can pick from that may be a combination of those, or it may be several things, but giving you somewhere to start, because burnout tends to be one of those just, wow, I'm not sure where to start. So we wanted to give you a way to do that today. We'll send this will be in the presentation. And if you have or want clarity a little bit more about how to run the technique, just let me know.
I think the thing I like so much about this model, Diane, is that it's so specific to us, right? You can attack a global problem, but when we do it for ourselves with our teams, that's when we get some actions that are realistic for us. And so I'm hopeful that we'll hear some great stories about how this discussion happens, whether it's burnout or another issue that people are tackling.
Absolutely. And it can be done with a group, or you could do it individually. Like I love these techniques that you can use on your own.
If you're an external processor, we had to talk it out.
Exactly right. So let's circle back to Jack Sparrow and kind of wrap it up here, Melissa.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question about how do we encourage people to take their paid time off is back to that same, the problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitudes. It's that we're looking at the wrong things. We have to get back to these basics of embracing the great realignment. You know, we want to be interviewing people to make sure they're a fit. As much as we feel this urgency to fill roles right now, we don't want the wrong people in the wrong roles. That doesn't do good things for our internal or external customer service. It doesn't do good things for holistic well-being of our team members or their productivity. So I think just the idea of embracing the great realignment is something that could be good for everyone, for our shareholders, our teams, and our customers, is what I'd like for us to take away today.
And this kind of goes back to our Mythbusters too. I think thinking about the problem, and we tend to just make statements about the problem. But in our Mythbusters, we were trying to kind of, well, how can we look at this a different way? How can we have a different attitude about what we say is the problem and really start to shift that thinking? So that was a great way to demonstrate we're changing our attitude about the problem. Resignation is going to happen, and why, but what does that mean, and how are we going to help realign organizations around that?
What's the metaphor, Diane? It's like bad attitude. A bad attitude's like a flat tire. You're not going anywhere until you change it.
That's right. That is right. So we have, obviously, those of you who are attending will have this presentation available. We have a link to that YOLO influence that we talked about earlier. And then one of the things we'd also like you to do is, if you are a Noom user, I don't know if you all have checked out this app. Noom was started out as really this kind of mental, psychological piece of how you change your attitude about weight loss. And they now have a new Noom mood, which helps you to begin to identify, as we go through all these emotional shifts around what we've gone through the last couple of years, where our careers are, to Michelle's point about how do I get more introspective around it. They've got this great app that we recommend you kind of try out. There's a free trial. And it really helps again to get you to start thinking more introspectively about the what and the how and the why. So any other questions before we turn it back over to Mark and team? Okay, Mark, we'll turn it back over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dan and Melissa. That was brilliant. And I think, like I said, personally, there's a lot of things related to my experience of burnout, and I'm sure everyone has something that's relative to them as well. So what we'll do is we'll send more information, including this presentation, and we'll send some links to some of the assessments, talent management information as well. After this, you'll receive it from Jenna, my colleague, who's here on screen. But yeah, thank you so much to everybody for listening today and being part of this webinar, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Have a great day or evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. You too.
Yeah.